quick question from our Discord channel, which is really nice. And I think it's a question that a lot of people have. And it's actually from Walter. And his question was, hey everyone, I'm attempting to get back into drawing and needed some advice. One of the things I wanted to get good at in the past was character art. I've always wanted to be able to make my art come to life and get the visualization out of my head on paper. But trying to teach myself this incredibly impatient high school self back didn't exactly work. So, especially when dealing with proportion, and that drove him insane at times. So, he figured out that he should start with one part of the body at a time. At least that's what he remembers doing in the past. But he also wants to know what are some recommendations for getting started with drawing characters, and if there's any advice, guide, videos, and stuff. So, today we have Jeff with us because,
Hello.
Jeff.
As Ginger said, my name is Jeff. I've worked in the game industry for board game, VR content development. I've also worked in animation as well. So I started off as a sequential artist at SCAD, where I primarily was working on like comics and storyboarding, and then eventually transitioned into concept art, environment art, and visual development for games and films. So one of the things that Ginger brought up for the question you had, where where should you start off on individual parts and proportion, my recommendation would be to work on the full body. Is to look at the full body, because it's very easy to get trapped in the idea of like working on specific portions, and then when you put it together it looks like some weird creature or monster. And that's partially because it's kind of like an environment. A lot of times people are like, oh, the safest parts or the ones that I feel easiest to do, I'll tackle that first. And for certain things that might work, but when you're talking about anatomy, your legs have a certain proportion to your torso. In some cases, your elbow to your shoulder distance is almost like halfway between your shoulder and your waist. And then if you look at a person's face, the eye is probably at level with maybe the top of your ear. Some people might be lower or higher depending on your age group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, pros. So this is some of Jeff's work, and it's categorized into environment, characters, vehicle, and props. We're not gonna go through all of this because this is quick Q&A, but you can see that like a lot of your environment work has to do with there's like also looks like post-apocalyptic sometimes, or futuristic as well too.
There's also mixes of like medieval or fantasy, but mostly sci-fi.
Yes. And let's take a look at your characters too, because I think that's one of the main questions was about characters and proportion. So the first thing that you did mention was life drawings. Do you draw a lot from references?
I try to do that as often as possible, just for verisimilitude, making it, whatever you're designing, at least somewhat grounded. Well, again, depends on what I'm working on. If it's something that's supposed to be like based on Mayans or based on whatever culture, you kind of want to be at least somewhat truthful to what you're working on. Because if suddenly it looks like some Polynesian thing and you're trying to go for something that's in Africa, people will go, what? That doesn't make sense. But for anatomy particularly, for if I'm doing just sketching, yeah, I will look at that, and then afterwards, once you're familiar with how proportions work, then you can start stretching it and doing crazy stuff with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you do a lot of live drawing? So, okay, going back to the question first is if you're struggling with proportion and you're already learning how to do live drawings, like going to classes or going on YouTube and watching some videos, how do you know that you're improving other than just drawing something over and over?
Well, you definitely want to have a good mentor. For me, I had a lot of great teachers throughout the years. I've taken online courses at CGMA, the Computer Graphics Master Academy. I've had Ron Lehman, who did concept art for Thor: Dark World and so on, a couple Avenger movies as well. So he would he would set up a 10 weeks course, and we'll work along with him. On Sundays, I teach at a art school that I've been a part of since high school. So I've known the teacher there for almost 13 years now. And when I started there, we did anatomy, we did still life drawing. We went through the whole traditional art course. And personally, if I would recommend someone who has time, definitely do the traditional art course. But if you don't, there's a lot of online content that allows you to do, gesture drawings. So there's like 3D, like 30-second poses. I don't know
Okay.
if they still have that. But what it is you have 3D models in poses that you normally would see in life drawing, and then you can set it to however long you want it to be, 30 seconds, a minute, 30 minutes, and then you can draw as much of it as possible.
Yeah. So I mean, we definitely have our ASIFA online live drawing class too. It was in beta, and now
Joe Peary?
with Joe Peary and also with Sandy Chamberlain. We are gonna rehash that back as well too. But going through like the different resources, one of the ones that you brought up was called a Lemonade. Is that correct? Is Lemonade?
That might be Ron Lehman's website, but
Okay, so
yeah.
I'm gonna pull that up real quick. Boop. Oops. So this is Lemonade. What do you recommend to look at this when you first go in? Is it the exercise or the videos or?
I mean, exercises, videos, especially today since we're all very visual learners, videos might be easier to digest.
Never drawn before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is even about holding a pencil. Interesting.
And that's actually kind of important. A lot of people don't realize that the way you hold your pencil, just like the physiology of like the way your hand mechanics work. Some people, when they hold a pencil very stiff, it creates certain markings versus ones where you're doing a tripod grip and you're a little bit looser. So based on how you make your strokes, it could also give different feelings to the markings you're doing when you're doing gesture drawing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're definitely going to the basics here. Learning the different ways of how you hold your pencils, or even this applies to digital too, I would say, because it's still transfer. Also, like there's this one where in their instructional, I guess beginners would work too in their beginners course. Circles.
So the circle, yeah, he taught us that too. So the circles is more of a warm up to loosen up your wrists. So when you're drawing, you don't have to keep trying to redraw and erase, the circles, because that's one of the harder shapes to draw.
And I think this is one thing that most people haven't really talked about when we say go back to the basics is I know a lot of people who are professional illustrators, and they will start off by maybe doing some circle exercise to warm up their hands as well, to kind of get more loose, because when one of the things that he was mentioned was, should I focus on parts of bodies? And I think when you're focusing on parts of bodies, it's the same as trying to get the details before you get the general idea. So like drawing the circles usually definitely can help you loosen up to try to work on the whole overall form and gesture before going to details.
That's part of it, but the other thing is also when you look at proportions, right? I tell my students this. I tell them, it's kind of like cooking. You can spend all your time trying to get, the proportion of this ginger right, but if your salt and your pepper and the amount of meat you put in is not correct, the whole thing's gonna be off. So when you draw a human torso, it's the same, or body, it's the same thing. The hands might look absolutely beautiful. You have all these articulating pieces, but then maybe the eyes is a little bit incorrect, or maybe the legs are longer.
And I think also this is another thing about drawing from real life then versus drawing from another illustration, because when I started out, I did a lot of drawing from other people's illustration and being stylized, but that also meant that especially I love anime and manga, so I always draw it face forward or 2/3, and then I noticed that I'm not drawing characters in different perspective, or like understanding that when we're posing characters, all my characters always look like this or like this.
Because it's easier, and it's kind of harkens back to the days when you have those paper dolls, and when you're doing dress up with paper dolls, they're almost symmetrical, and so it's easier just to create something by mirroring the image, and it's not a bad thing for concept art in a certain sense, because we still have to do a turnaround. We still do front, back, side, 3/4 view. But when you start getting into more illustration, where you have characters moving in space, then you have more Z depth, right? Like my hands up close to the camera, is much bigger than if it was all the way back here.
Yeah,
so.
And I think one of our watcher, Mike Bays, also talked about line of action being a really good resource as well too. So I would say definitely a lot of these places I would start if you're going to be with characters, definitely figure drawing, because like how of course hands and feet are important too, but when you're drawing characters, you'd want to get the figures right as well as an overall basis. So these I'm not gonna show you in details, but there are nude models online that if you put in, if you want like all the models, only covered models, for example, and like include both models and what kind of selection, all time or classes with different intervals, and you can get drawings and you can actually see these online. and then you can actually practice drawing them as well too. So Jeff, when we're looking at something like this, real quick for this guy, what do you start with when you're drawing?
Well, the way that I was taught was I'll start off looking at the torso area, like where the spine is, and then you go from there and you'll extend outwards from the and get the shape of the outside of the limbs. You're not. I wouldn't try to block out each of the different pieces, but rather really quickly get that angle where his feet comes out. So it's a very triangular sort of shape.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Same with these two. I mean, like when you're doing live drawing, there's definitely a difference because this is a 3D person, and they're doing different types of pose instead of like if you're drawing from imagination as well. It's kind of forcing you to kind of learn how to draw as well too.
Yeah, and don't worry about like all the muscles and stuff. Try to get the general shape down and the general force of maybe your elbow curves a certain way, and you want to get that down. And then once you have that direction, then you can start attaching all the other details on top of it.
So one thing that I've noticed as well too is sometimes when you're drawing, it's very hard to get characters into different angles because I'll notice a lot of people have drawings, but the hand perspective is a little bit off, a little bit weird. How do you deal with that? How do you start to get your characters into proportion, especially after you have to stylize them?
I mean, a lot of it's just down to experience, and you study photography. Sometimes even I will do it. I'll take pictures of myself, in that particular position, or I'll grab my brother and photograph him, holding a sword or something, and then I'll use that as a reference. There's been a couple of times when when Ginger's been animating, she'll grab me and tell me to come by and say, hey, get into this pose. How would it move, mechanically?
Yeah. I would also say the other thing that I use, because I'm not as strong in drawing as Jeff is, I use a lot of maybe 3D layouts to help me with that as well, because there's a lot of 3D models that are already online. So you can kind of grab those as well to pose them, in Blender or like even Poser. And then that way you can try to get the work on perspective, because I think the trap is if we're doing things by ourselves, we usually gravitate to what we're comfortable with. So we'll have a really nice character with really nice eyes, but the rest of the bodies just don't match.
I would also, while I also use 3D models quite a bit in my composition, I would also caution about relying on 3D too much, because at the moment, just right now, it's going to get better, but there still has been some issues with things looking kind of mechanical with 3D. So if you're getting just body mechanics where things have been motion captured and stuff, it might be okay. But if you're trying to do human expression and faces, it still might be better to study it from real life than using something that's 3D or something you've seen on television.
Oh, definitely, for sure. So I think the other question is for asking again, do you and we've already addressed this a little bit about starting at one part, right? What about hands? Because I know that hands are usually something that people struggle a lot with.
And they are. Part of it is because there's so many different places, and this is actually where perspective becomes such a big thing, because you see, like if my fingers are down like this, do you see how small and stubby they look? But then when I do that, they elongate. Yeah, that's all perspective, and yeah, you definitely need to understand that if something's closer to you, it's gonna be bigger, and when they're farther away, they taper together. But then when you have this is now an overlap. And so that's another way to create perspective, is having one shape over another. But even then, even with lighting, you can tell a shape behind it is also darker. And sometimes when you sketch, you can put just a little bit of shade at the bottom just to separate the different planes.
Yeah, so this is where it gets into character designing, because while one of the things that we're taught when we first start off with character design is also to make strong silhouettes and posings that really matter. So usually you start off with sometimes just drawing out silhouettes of the characters and many different forms to get them.
Even for the hands too, because like if you hold your hands together, it's almost like a mitt, So right here where your hands are, you have almost like a trapezoidal shape, and then you have, and then this whole part right here could be another shape, and then you can break them down to fingers rather than trying to do, each finger at a time. That's going to be very tedious. But see, like this shape right here from this area to this area is much wider than compared to here. And so based on how your fingers are aligned, you can change up the arc and sweep of the shape, based off of the hand positioning. And there's always reference points, so always look for major changes in your positioning. So maybe from my finger to my knuckles, that will be one shape. Then from my thumb down here to where my the palm or the back of my hand is, that will be like another shape too. Same thing with the feet too, because your feet, you have the ball and then you have the heel.
Here's my feet.
Yeah, I wish I could take my
I was
feet
like,
up
here's
for
my
that.
feet. I'm sorry. I was like, okay, that's not cool. But did you want to point anything out about my feet? I'm sorry.
Sure, yeah. So
Okay.
so
This is
so
such an
so
awkward position.
you have an ankle here. So from here to
Okay, got it.
to this area, that could be a shape of itself. The heel will be another shape, and then your toes will be another shape. So you can break it.
Die.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can break a like a more complex shape into multiple pieces. You know, like even the head. See, like a whole head, you have eyes and nose, but within itself, you still have the middle point, the middle line, and then from there you have from the nose to the mouth to the chin. In between will be where your mouth is, and then you also have a forehead where you have a hairline. So a lot of times people draw either forehead's way too high or way too low to the point where they have no eyebrows. Those are all things to like look out for when you're doing
Yeah,
proportions.
and I would say the other thing to practice too is drawing diverse characters, because like
Oh,
there's
that's a
this
good one.
yeah there's a gravitation to draw like people with perfect body shapes. But look at this, it's like if you learn how to draw like chubbier cheeks kind of thing, adding to it, it's more character too, as well as learning to actually understand different types of facial shape building. Like it's almost like sometimes for some people, if they're more hands-on, I would suggest even trying sculpting with clay as well too, because that way you can start to see like like what you're building on and off, because the skeleton is usually relatively the same, but then you have all these body masses that come on that makes everything a little bit more different. But if you keep trying to draw perfect girl, perfect guy, then you're not varying your skill sets as well as your power of observation.
Yeah, and that's one of the hard things to do, is because we use ourselves as reference most of the time. So I find myself sort of drawing characters with very similar characteristics to what I have, and it's going to be something where you need to look at more reference resources. If you have other friends who are from other demographics, ask them to pose for you.
Yeah.
Go to life drawings where they have more diverse models as well too, because even at SCAD we have people who are African American, who are Caucasian, who are Asian, who come in, so we're not just drawing the same model every single time.
Yeah, the more diverse the better. Like I know a lot of my friends will actually go to the mall and sketch people as well
Oh, I
too.
used to do that too.
Yeah, well, not now. Right now,
Oh,
you
yeah.
can sketch from a distance as long as you don't look creepy. You can look out your window and start sketching things, and the faster it is, sometimes the better it works. Also, some suggestions that you're asking about is one of the ones I really like too is Schoolism. Schoolism has a really nice course that they have from like professionals, and they're usually here like drawing people. And when you want to do characters, if you want to do it well, the same thing as how learn a rule before you break them. Definitely learn how to draw like something well, and then you can break it as well too. That's usually one of the highly suggested stuff as well too. What about any like resources on YouTube that you like to follow?
Well, for me, it's mainly been artists like Feng Zhu, FCD School. He's based in Singapore, but he does a lot of like environment concepts. But he talks a lot about fundamentals, and no matter what you're drawing, whether it's environments or vehicles or characters, always going back to fundamentals is critical. It really determines whether or not the final drawing comes out looking convincing. That's what you're trying to go for, is whether or not it's convincing. And a lot of that is also building up your visual library, because if you're trying to draw, again, someone from a different time period or different era, different genre, if you only watch Avatar, then all you're ever going to draw is only Avatar. If you only watch anime, you're ever going to draw is just anime. So if you have time to look up structures or people, the clothing from different countries, you'll see all the differences in terms of shapes and sizes.
And another one is, I know that Jeff likes to have a lot of reference book. We have one of our members, Mark Simon, as well. He has like a whole book on facial expression, which is basically all different types of face and different types of like perspective. I think this is great too, because like from now, that means that you are trying it from different perspective and expression. Once you start getting into like more of the character building, I think expression is very important, because sometimes a lot of people will draw it with a neutral face, again, like especially in a lot of illustrations that I see. But a lot of times people's eyes are not perfect. They're not like, one might be smaller than the other, and how it looks in comparison to the face So having like trying to draw from master studies or from other people's portraits usually gives a better variety, especially when you're having it from different angles too.
Yeah, the shot with the camera from the bottom up, that's always been a hard one for me and a lot of other people.
Yeah, because
yeah, just
sometimes, you know,
perspective.
we tend to like things that are, oh, you know, let's beautify it. And maybe sometimes that's not what it's supposed to be. Like, if you want it to look good, sometimes you have to break out of trying to draw just these portrait shapes and go for something that, you know, it's like, okay, this is not going to be like, oh, the nicest front ideal angle, but these are the ones that make things interesting.
Yeah, and it's just that it also tells a story where if you're looking up at someone, you know, maybe it makes them look stronger, or it could even mean, you know, the character is at a disadvantaged position, and the character now has like a very menacing sort of feel to it as well.
Yeah. So I think that's it for our really quick Q&A Tuesday. I hope that helped. Anything you want to
good
leave
luck.
with?
I will say just keep drawing, and then if you have time, you can go on our Discord channel for ASIFA, and you can talk to the artists on there, and a lot of people might give you tips and pointers if you reach out to them. And we're all very we're doing our best to be professional on there, so reach out to us.
Yeah, and for me, I would say that like there is a point before you get to where you actually like your skill set that you're gonna be like, oh, I hate it, or one day you'll be like, oh, I love it, and the second day you're gonna be like, oh my god, that looks like crap. It's that's a good thing. It's a good thing because your eyes are starting to train to get where you want to go. And the other thing that I have friends that I talk to a lot who are concept artists, and they also say, if you're going to go into character versus illustration, the one big thing to take away is character is about people. It's about their stories as well too. So when you're designing a character, try designing from the inside outwards as well. Once you get your proportions and your visuals basic down. So I would say that once you head from having a really good illustration, being able to master the proportions, perspective, then also think about the character's motivation, how they live. That influences how they look like, because they can have a chipped tooth if they're very adventurous because they've climbed a tree, fell down, stuff like that as well too.
Well, another important one to bring up is also materiality, like textures, because when you're designing something metal or leather, they look a certain way. Cast iron versus something that's brushed steel will have different specularity. So after you start moving into lighting, once you feel comfortable with just getting a gesture down, you'll start moving towards just putting color and light on your character, and that's a whole other thing to deal with. But that's something to look forward to.
But thank you for joining us for a quick Q&A Tuesday. We did make it quick this time. And also, we will have more of our online live drawing session with Joe Peary, one of our veterans. He's giving a lot of tips and stuff as well too. So keep an eye out for that. As well as thanks Elston for saying that he likes our Discord channel.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if you have any more questions, you can definitely leave that into our Discord Q&A too. And nice to see you, Walter. If you have any more questions, leave in our Q&A. Thanks, guys. Bye.